The Cry of the Graves. Part 1. The Emir walked into the courtroom and took the central chair, while at his right and left sat the wise men of the country. The guards, armed with swords and spears, stood in attention, and the people who came to witness the trial rose and bowed ceremoniously to the Emir, whose eyes emanated a power that revealed horror to their spirits and fear to their hearts. As the court came to order and the hour of judgment approached, the Emir raised his hand and shouted, saying, "Bring forth the criminals singly and tell me what crimes they have committed." The prison door opened like the mouth of a ferocious, yawning beast. In the obscure corners of the dungeon, one could hear the echo of shackles rattling in unison with the moaning and lamentations of the prisoners. The spectators were eager to see the prey of death emerging from the depths of that inferno. A few moments later, 2 soldiers came out, leading a young man with his arms pinioned behind his back. His stern face bespoke nobility of soul, of spirit, and strength of the face and his stern face bespoke nobility of spirit and strength of the heart. He was halted in the middle of the courtroom, and the soldiers marched a few steps to the rear. The Emir stared at him steadily and said, "What crime has this man, who is proudly and triumphantly standing before me, committed?" One of the courtmen responded, "He is a murderer. Yesterday he slew one of the Emir's officers who was on an important mission in the surrounding villages. He was still grasping the bloody sword when he was arrested." The Emir retorted with anger, "Return the man to the dark prison and tie him with heavy chains, and at dawn cut off his head with his own sword, and throw his body in the woods so that the beasts may eat the flesh, and the air may carry its remindful odor to the noses of his family and friends." The youth was returned to prison, while the people looked upon him with sorrowful eyes. For he was a young man in the spring of life. The soldiers returned back again from the prison, leading a young woman of natural and frail beauty. She looked pale, and upon her face appeared the signs of oppression and disappointment. Her eyes were soaked with tears, and her head was bent under the burden of grief. After eyeing her thoroughly, the Emir exclaimed, "And this emaciated woman, who is standing before me like the shadow beside a corpse, what has she done?" One of the soldiers answered him, saying, "She is an adulteress. Last night her husband discovered her in the arms of another. After her lover escaped, her husband turned her over to the law." The Emir looked at her, while she raised her face without expression, and he ordered, "Take her back to the dark room and stretch her upon a bed of thorns, so that she may remember the resting place which she polluted with her fault. Give her vinegar mixed with gall to drink, so that she may remember the taste of those sweet kisses. At dawn, drag her naked body outside the city and stone her. Let the wolves enjoy the tender meat of her body, and the worms pierce her bones." As she walked back to the dark cell, the people looked upon her with sympathy and surprise. They were astonished with the Emir's justice, and grieved over her fate. The soldiers reappeared, bringing with them a sad man with shaking knees and trembling like a tender sapling before the north wind. He looked powerless, sickly, and frightened, and he was miserable and poor. The Emir stared at him loathfully and inquired, "And this filthy man, who is like dead amongst the living, what has he done?" One of the guards returned, "He is a thief who broke into the monastery and stole the sacred vases which the priests found under his garment when they arrested him. And execution can still be a thing with dignity. You don't expose, you don't render people immodest as part of their punishment. And long prison sentences, both from guards and other prisoners, it's too much of a risk for society to have done wrong to people by locking them up a long time, for that to be the punishment in itself, that they're just locked up a long time, and whether they just do their time or whatever, it's just up to, no, it shouldn't be just up to. Anyways, as a hungry eagle who looks at a bird with broken wings, the emir looked at him and said, "Take him back to the jail and chain him, and at dawn drag him into a lofty tree and hang him between heaven and earth, so his sinful hands may perish, and the members of his body may be turned into particles and scattered by the wind." As the thief stumbled back into the depths of the prison, the people commenced whispering one to another, saying, "How dare such a weak and heretic man steal the sacred vases of the monastery?" Well, was that his intention? Death's not good, and stealing from a collective public thing is, can make things worse. But at this time, the court adjourned, and the emir walked out, accompanied by all his wise men, guarded by the soldiers, while the audience scattered, and the place became empty except the moaning and wailing of the prisoners. All this happened while I was standing there like a mirror before the passing ghosts. I was meditating the laws made by man for man, contemplating what the people call justice, and engrossing myself with deep thoughts of the secrets of life. I tried to understand the meaning of the universe. I was dumbfounded in finding myself lost like a horizon that disappears beyond the cloud. As I left the place, I said to myself, "The vegetable feeds upon the elements of the earth. The sheep eats the vegetable, the wolf preys upon the sheep, and the bull kills the wolf, while the lion devours the bull. Yet death claims the lion. Is there any power that will overcome death and make these brutalities an eternal justice? Is there a force that can convert all these ugly things into beautiful objects? Is there any might that can clutch with its hands all the elements of life and embrace them with joy as the sea joyfully engulfs all the brooks into its depths? Is there any power that can arrest the murdered and the murderer, the adulteress and the adulterer, the robber and the robbed, and bring them into court loftier and more supreme than the court of the emir?" Part 2. The next day I left the city for the fields, where silence reveals to the soul that which the spirit desires, and where the pure sky kills the germs of despair, nursed in the city by the narrow streets and obscured places. When I reached the valley, I saw a flock of crows and vultures soaring and descending, filling the sky with cawing, whistling, and rustling of the wings. As I proceeded, I saw before me a corpse of a man hanged high in a tree, and the body of a naked woman in the midst of a heap of stones, and a carcass of a youth with his head cut off and soaked with blood mixed with earth. It was a horrible sight that blinded my eyes with a thick, dark veil of sorrows. I looked in every direction and saw naught except that specter of death standing by those ghastly remains. Nothing could be heard except the wailing of non-existence, mingled with the cawing of crows hovering about the victims of human laws. 3 human beings, who yesterday were in the lap of life, today fell as victims to death because they broke the rules of human society. When a man kills another man, the people say he is a murderer. but when the emir kills him, the emir is just. When a man robs a monastery, they say he is a thief, but when the emir robs him of his life, the emir is honorable. When a woman betrays her husband, they say she is an adulteress, but when the emir makes her walk naked in the streets and stones her later, the emir is noble. Well, clearly not in the walking naked in the street part, but shedding of blood is forbidden. But who made it lawful for the emir? Stealing one's money is a crime, but taking away one's life is a noble act. Betrayal of a husband may be an ugly deed, but stoning of living souls is a beautiful sight. Shall we meet evil with evil and say this is the law? Well, negative and evil aren't quite the same thing, but, and this isn't the best example of, well, is when the government does it. Well, governments nowadays do a heck of a lot worse things than that. Shall we fight corruption with greater corruption and say this is the rule? Shall we conquer crimes with more crimes and say this is justice? Had not the emir killed an enemy in his past life? Had he not robbed his weak subjects of money and property? Had he not committed adultery? Was he infallible when he killed the murderer and hanged the thief and stoned the adulteress? Who are those who hanged the thief in the tree? Are they angels descended from heaven, or men looting and usurping? Who cut off the murderer's head? Are they divine prophets, or soldiers shedding blood wherever they go? Who stoned that adulteress? Were they virtuous hermits who came from their monasteries? Are humans who love to commit atrocities with glee under the protection of ignorant law? What is law? Who saw it coming with the sun from the depths of heaven? What humans saw the heart of God and found its will or purpose? In what century did the angels walk among the people and preach to them, saying, "Forbid the weak from enjoying life and kill the outlaws with the sharp edge of the sword and step upon the sinners with iron feet"? I'm sorry if people feel this way, but spiritual and secular laws aren't about, well, to keep people from enjoying life. Well, some traditions don't want you to enjoy life, but as my mind suffered in this fashion, I heard a rustling of feet in the grass close by. I took heed and saw a young woman coming from behind the trees. She looked carefully in every direction before she approached the 3 carcasses that were there. As she glanced, she saw the youth's head that was cut off. She cried, fearfully, knelt, and embraced it with her trembling arms. Then she commenced shedding tears and touching the blood-matted, curly hair with her soft fingers, crying in a voice that came from the remnants of a shattered heart. She could bear the sight no longer. She dragged the body to a ditch and placed the head gently between the shoulders, covered the entire body with earth, and upon the grave she planted the sword with which the head of the young man had been cut off. As she started to leave, I walked toward her. She trembled when she saw me. Her eyes were heavy with tears. And, well, in real life, I don't think he would leave the sword, but one of the things that happens is there can be sort of a spiritual possession involved with the tools of crime. Now, just because it was turned towards justice or retribution at the least, doesn't mean that means that the thing is safe to be among society. Because even a weapon